Hello, and welcome to School to Homeschool. My name is Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 6, and a former middle school teacher turned homeschool mom. I have kids in their 20s all the way down to elementary age and everything in between. Are you thinking about pulling your kids from the public school system like I did, but you are scared to death and don't know what to do next? My friends, I felt the exact same way. And you have come to the right place. I want to help your family leave the system so that you can take the hearts and minds of your children back. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm very excited for today's guest because he's in a situation that so many families are in. And I wanted him to come on to talk about how he navigates homeschooling in his particular situation. So I'd like to welcome Michael Nelson. He is a father to 3 kids, and he's a single dad. So he's navigating homeschooling kids as a single father. He's got 3 kids, ages 10, 8, and 6. And he is a web developer and software engineer who works from home and is navigating being a single dad while homeschooling. So, Michael, thank you for taking the time to meet with me today and discuss your life and how you work through all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no problem.
So let's get started. First of all, homeschooling is not new to you.
No.
Tell a little bit about your past with homeschooling, being a homeschooled person yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, my mom was a teacher. She's been teaching for over 20 years, and I was one of the guinea pigs that she had started her learning experience with. Me and my 2 brothers, they had less homeschooling time than I did. So my mom was going through getting her master's and doing her para work and getting into teaching while I was in my early years of schooling. So the majority of my school experience up through high school was doing homeschool stuff. So for me, it was second nature. It was a lot of not just development of my education, but also it was formative to my experience of the kind of person I became and how I approach learning and what's important to me and those kinds of things. And so that's a lot of what informed what I want and what my goals are with my own kids as well.
Awesome. What kind of homeschooling did you do, or did your parents do with you when you were growing up? What would you say?
In the early years, it was pretty hands-on stuff. My mom did a lot of things with me in particular, where she was setting the foundations for reading and literacy and those foundational skills for math and writing and all of that. And then the later years, since she was doing school and she was working at the same time, both my parents were gone quite a bit with work. I ended up doing, both me and my older brother Timmy ended up doing a lot of our schooling by ourselves, and then my mom would come back and she'd grade everything at the end of the day, but a lot of it was pretty independent, and so it helped shape a independent sense of seeking knowledge and being able to learn on your own and not needing necessarily a formal structure unless it was helpful. But yeah, so it was a good mix of early set the foundation skills, and then once we had everything set up, we were able to do things alone.
That's awesome. Did you like it? Because I know that's a question that a lot of people
Mm.
have, like myself, like we're like, okay, here's somebody who was a homeschooler. Did they, and now they're an adult. Did you enjoy it? What did you like? What did you not like?
To me, I didn't really think about it at the time, obviously, because it was just life. It was just what we were doing.
Hmm.
And I did end up doing a year in high school where I was public schooled, and then I went to a community college for my higher education stuff. And so I didn't really have that basis of comparison until later. Thinking back upon it now, I really value the experiences that I had because I'm able to compare to people that I know that went through public school their entire educational journey,
Hmm.
and I prefer the fact that I'm able to be independent in how I do things. I don't rely on, hey, I need to learn this thing, so I need to go find someone to teach me, or I have to have a formal environment for it. It's just, hey, I need to know this thing. Where can I get the information? And then, I'm off to the races with a lot of stuff. So it was very good for setting that independence and that autonomy for your own learning.
I love it. Now, a lot of people, I know a fear for a lot of people considering homeschooling is, well, my child will never get into college if they homeschool because homeschoolers don't go to college, which is ridiculous, right? It's this ridiculous myth that's floating out there. What was your experience?
So we didn't really have any issues with the logistical side of things. We'd had transcripts. My mom, since she was a teacher, was good about keeping documentation, and she got us through the testing at the regular intervals and all of that stuff. So we had the transcripts in place for all of that to get into, and again, going to community college, they're pretty leisure with a lot of those kinds of things. They're not as stringent on the requirements that you have to hit. And we were okay with that sort of environment because, again, the same sort of attitude of if we had been really, really harping on grades and the formal education systems metrics for what success looks like and all of those things, maybe we would have had a harder time getting into a university environment.
Mhm.
But going to community college where it's just, hey, what do you want to learn? What are you looking to get accredited for? Those that environment is more flexible and willing to work with you on different things. So we didn't have really any issues in that situation. But
Mhm.
for parents who are looking at approaching that into the future, again, just keep your transcripts up to date and keep your documents, keep your systems, all of your information in place. Have a good organizational system for how you keep records with where your kids are at, and at the very least, having your materials saved. That's what I'm
Mhm.
doing with my kids, and that has been successful thus far, just the last 2 years with the district. But I've gone to the local office for the district and talked to the people there and, hey, what do you need from me to make sure that we have all of our files and everything in place and that we know where we're at with everything?
Nice, nice. Now, did you finish with a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree? Did you leave school? What did that look like?
I left with an associate's, but I also left, I went directly. I had a big part of what college really is. All of the learning you do in college, you can learn outside of college. So, more
Mhm.
what's important there is the networking aspects of it and forming relationships with industry peers and those kinds of things. So, I had gotten a pretty good relationship with one of my teachers who was a freelance designer, and he every summer will hire some of his students that he has a good relationship with to do intern work. So I
Mhm.
left school and immediately started interning with him and doing my own freelance stuff, and that led to the first job that I got, and that has set the foundations for the career that I have now.
Very nice, very nice. So, okay, let's talk now. Then, moving into getting married, becoming a parent. Did did you always know that you wanted to homeschool your kids, or is that something um, like talk a little bit about that, and then let's talk about when you got married. How did that translate into the marriage?
Mhm. I had always planned on homeschooling my kids. It was something that seeing my mom as a teacher, seeing the shortcomings of the public school environment, seeing how kids were, they just weren't really utilizing the area
Mhm.
well for various reasons. But there are a lot of kids that just didn't take it very seriously, and they weren't getting a good education. The system and the environment itself wasn't able to tailor itself to each kid individually. I got to see the issues in that environment. And then when I was in high school, the 1 year that I was public school, and then in college, got to experience it myself. I just knew with my kids, I want to be able to give them the tailored education. I know that there's good curriculums out there. I know there's good tools for whatever issues you might run into, whatever complications. There are solutions and ways of doing things in homeschool that you can solve those problems. Whereas in high school, there's very limited ways of
Mhm.
adjusting what you're doing to your kid.
Gotcha. Now, when you got married, had your wife also homeschooled, or was she a public schooler?
She had homeschooled her entire life as well, but she did not grow up with people that were in the education space, and the
Hmm.
curriculum that they had chosen was not very good. It wasn't conducive to her learning style, and
Hmm.
it was very religiously based and not high in information. So
Hmm.
it was more about hammering home all of the religious idealism that her parents had. So she had a pretty negative perspective and experience with homeschooling. So she was resistant to it in the early years as she became more exposed to other curriculums and other experiences and things, she got more open to it, but it wasn't necessarily something she was super interested in. And so post divorce is when um, Abby specifically was already in, she did preschool and then kindergarten, and Charlotte was coming into things. So it started to become something we were talking about pretty consistently. And it took a long time, a lot of work of going back and forth with what her concerns with homeschool have been and what my concerns with the public education system have been, and coming to the agreement of getting their foundational skills in place in a public school environment and then getting their higher education stuff handled within homeschool.
And so, okay, so how long were y'all married before you decide, well, before you went through the divorce?
We were married 7 years.
Okay. And then if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been divorced?
4.5, 5 years, somewhere in there.
Gotcha. So, what were some of her concerns about the homeschooling piece?
Primarily some bias, but then also some legitimacy in that as a non formally educated teacher, she questions the legitimacy of someone who is not a professional educator doing teaching things.
Mm-hmm.
And her negative experiences with the curriculums that she had gone through
Mm-hmm.
left her doubting whether any curriculum could sufficiently set up a non professional educator to properly teach any kids. And especially, kids are all different. So she had the concerns that, hey, with each of our kids, are you going to be able to properly cater this to their learning style? But then also, if you can't, how are we going to address those concerns? And those are legitimate things. But
Mm-hmm.
I have the benefit of, since I did grow up with a teacher, and not only was my mom a teacher, I was doing stuff with her throughout my growing up. She didn't have necessarily the most places to put us kids. So Timmy and Hans, both being older, they could go other places, but I was the youngest, so she just had to bring me along for a lot of things. So I ended up doing a lot of stuff with her and what she was teaching. So I got a certain amount of experience with what does educating look like, but then how do you do it? And even doing some of it myself, I did a lot of teacher's aid type things with her
Mm-hmm.
growing up. So I got some of those skills in place, but it's not something that you necessarily, the curriculum can do a lot of the work for you, and it's something you can 100% learn as you go.
I love it. I have to chuckle because I was a public school teacher, and that concern of like, oh, there's going to be holes in their education, and will I be able to teach the learning styles? And I think, oh no, teachers in the education system have 30 kids per class, and if they're secondary ed, they're teaching 150 kids a day. There is no way they're meeting the needs of all 150 kids or 30 kids. Like, not possible, because teachers are pretty awesome, but they're not Superman. And so I
Yeah.
always chuckle because I'm like, well, one-on-one tutoring is always better, in reality, because it's just you and a child, or you and three kids, as opposed to you and 32 kids or 28 kids. You know what I mean? So, but I
Yeah.
hear that often is like, oh, well, I'm not a professional educator, but a tutor is always better than a ratio of 1 to 32, always, always.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And if we could all afford a professional tutor, that would be awesome. But unfortunately, that's pretty out of reach for a lot of us. Um,
well, I think it's funny because when I was in high school, there was 6 weeks that I got really sick, and so I was at
mhm.
home, and we had a tutor who wasn't a licensed teacher, and she would sit with me for a couple hours, and it wasn't technically, I don't think it was technically homeschooling, because it was only 6 weeks,
Okay.
but she didn't know the subjects, but we'd read the books together, and then I'd do the work, and I was a freshman in high school, and it was just fine. And when I went back to public school, I was ahead of my peers, even though I had a tutor that worked with me for 2 hours a day, 4 days a week,
Mhm.
like, it was just that one-on-one. And she wasn't a licensed professional. Like, she wasn't a math. There was times that she's like, oh, I don't know how to do this geometry. Let's look up it, try to figure it out in the textbook. And so we try to figure it out together, but yet I still was ahead, even though she wasn't technically a professional educator,
Mhm.
which kind of makes me laugh because I'm like, We
Yeah.
did just fine without, and we didn't even have the internet back then. So, which is kind of funny.
That is, yeah,
Go
go ahead.
ahead. No,
I was
please.
It's a funny thing too, because no matter what route you take, like I was in homeschool and I did have things that were holes in my educational experience, but then also every single person I've ever met who was public school their entire lives, they all have plenty of holes in their education too. It's just a thing that you're not always going to be 100% able to learn everything, just you as a person. So even if you have a perfect curriculum, a perfect teacher, perfect educational setup, it's not possible to do it perfectly. So it's something you just have to have a reasonable understanding of just the human flexibility and the organic nature of education and the fact that your kids are going to grow up and they're going to have some holes and they're going to have to adjust and figure it out as they go, as we all do. So it's
Mm-hmm.
more than likely going to be fine.
Yeah, well, and I even think about it. I had Dr. Peter Gray on, who wrote Free to Learn
Mm,
last year. And one of the things he said is, he's like, there's more, and he wrote this in the book as well, that there's so much information in the world to learn. It's not physically possible for a person to learn everything in their lifetime.
mm.
Um, and we can only learn a little slice in our lifetime. So why are we all learning the same slice? Like, there's, and people are different, and people's talents are different, and so and by the time, which I've been thinking about, by the time a lot of kids leave high school and they go out on their own, there are jobs which require skills and ability and knowledge that didn't exist 5 years ago or 3 years ago, that they're going to
Mm.
have to figure out and learn. And I think what you brought up earlier, like when you're like, I found, I could figure out the resources, I could figure out what to do. And that's the key. I think that's the key to education, is like, do we teach our children how to find the answers when they need them
Mm.
without being told, like to seek out, as you had to do, to figure things out? Can we teach our kids how to figure things out and do it well?
Yeah, and
That's the key.
that was a lot of what Trace and I had discussed is as the counterpoint to her concerns with, hey, can we tailor all of stuff perfectly to each of our kids? And a lot of what we discussed is the information is important, but it's secondary to the development of their ability to teach themselves, but also to learn. And when you're in a public school environment, what I've seen a lot of, the issues that I had the most concerns with is it makes you dependent on an external source to be able to learn things, to be able to get information. It has to be fed to you in a very specific way because they're not teaching you how to learn. They're teaching you directly the information. Here, receive this chunk of information now, regurgitate it back to me. You did a good job there. Whereas homeschool, what it can do if you do it well, what I am an advocate of and what my experience was in homeschool is, did I get all the information that I necessarily needed from homeschooling? No, but it taught me how to advocate for my own learning, how to learn myself without having to be dependent on anything or anyone else. And so then, if the information is available and your kid knows how to learn, they don't need somebody else necessarily for that process, then you know that whatever thing you forgot, whatever thing you didn't teach them that day, or whatever thing they were too spaced out or overstimulated to learn on a given day, they can get that information in the future with whatever way works best for them.
I love it. So let's talk about, okay, at what point your kids started, okay, you guys decide, at what point, how many years ago did you decide, okay, I think we're going to try homeschooling? What, about when was that?
Well, for me, I decided many years ago. Trace and I agreed to finally pull the trigger before this past school year. So not the current one, last year, because last year was when we finally started it with Abby. And so, yeah, that was just a long process of a few years to get her comfortable with the idea of third grade for each of them is when we start homeschooling. So
Gotcha.
before Abby went into third grade is when we started.
And Abby's 10 now, correct?
Hmm.
Okay, so up until, so the agreement that y'all have is up until third grade, they go to public school. Once they hit third grade, you start homeschooling.
Hmm.
Okay, so now let's get into the nitty gritty, because I think this is where it gets tricky for a lot of families, is like, how do we make it work when you're divorced and you're co-parenting, and there's 50-50 custody and they're going back and forth? What does homeschooling look like for your family in that situation?
Yeah, so last year it was all me, and it was just a lot of work. And so this year, Teresa was not very happy last year with feeling like she was excluded, which was not
Mm-hmm.
something we had done intentionally. She had voiced, if you want to do it, you do it. I'm not going to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so this year she wanted to be more involved. And so that's where we have found new ways of allowing time for us both to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we do, so first of all, just choosing the curriculum. Again, I'm going to probably keep bringing this up. My mom's a teacher, so I leaned heavily on her information for that. And so
Mm-hmm.
the advice I give to other people is lean on the community. Not everybody has a teacher mother or somebody in their direct family who is in the educational environment, but the homeschool community is large, and there are a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people with varying levels of being a part of the formal system, or at the very least, they've been doing homeschooling for a long time. So if you don't know, there are lots and lots of people who do. So go ask lots and lots of questions. And so that's the process that I went through for, I think it was 2 years of
Wow.
research and investigation, and just a lot of intermittent conversations about what are the kids like? What needs do they have? What learning styles work best for them? What materials suit those particular styles best? But then also questions like what my time commitments are and how I can best be a part of the kids' educational day to day. And so then that informed some of the curriculum choices we've done. And so a lot of what we've done is, so it's primarily Sunlight, and because Sunlight allows for a good amount of independence, and it primarily is through reading. So if your kid has a good foundation of reading, then a lot of their schooling can just be through consuming written material, and it doesn't have to be a ton of hands-on work for anybody. And then for
Mm-hmm.
science, math, those things are separate materials. We're doing the Scott Forsman for science, and then Mecon in the early years for math, and then going up to Saxon for that. And those things were chosen for the ability, A, for the kids to be independent for a lot of their different subject work, but then for the things that require more hands on work, it allows time where they're just doing their reading, they're doing their writing. They don't need to be super involved in those things aside from I read them what they're doing for the day. And so then
Mm-hmm.
science and math that are generally more complicated subjects for kids to understand, it frees up a lot of time for me to really be hands on with those subjects with them. And so since I do have the advantage of being, I work from home, a lot of times it is just I'm sitting at the kitchen table or the dining room table and I'm working on my computer, and the girls will be in the living room next to me or at the table with me doing their work. And if they have questions, I can stop for a few minutes and answer a question. And then if it's something that involves a lot of work, we can sit together and do it. And so there are certain things where the other piece of advice I give to parents is do not limit yourself to the resources that are within your house at the moment. So if you are finding, hey, I'm struggling to find a good way of explaining fractions to my kid, get some of the physical manipulatives that kids can use. So those different pie graph things, or some Cuisenaire rods, or um, Abby is more like me where she really needs to see things, and
Mm-hmm.
Charlotte is more abstract, so she can have it just be explained to her and she can understand that without necessarily needing to see it. So with Abby, we do a lot of watching YouTube videos and things like that. As far as splitting up time between me and Teresa, a lot of it has been figuring out what skill sets does Teresa have versus my skill sets, and being able to determine, okay, so you only have them during these 2 school days. So we will make it to where we specifically chose the 4-day week schedule. So that is our setup for the curriculum. And then since Teresa is less interested in teaching and it's not something she's super comfortable with in general, I've tried to make it as easy on her as possible while allowing her to still be involved as much as she wants to be.
Hmm.
So she's only committed to having to get one day's amount of work done. She can call me as much as she needs to cover what stuff she doesn't understand in the curriculum or in the materials and those sorts of things. If there's something that it's a particular day's work that she doesn't know what to do, she can just leave it and I'll take care of it when the kids get back. But we only have to get 4 days done in a week. So that leaves a lot of time and flexibility there.
Now, and that you said that you went with a 4 day a week schedule. Is there like a book or that you base that on, or is that you're like, let's just plan that 4 days a week? That's what we're going to do.
So that is based on Sunlight's schedule. So they have
Gotcha.
different
Okay.
options for their things, and one of the options was a 4 day. And so then the Scott Forsman and the Mecon slash Saxon math stuff, all I did
Hmm.
is I just go through the books that they're supposed to finish for the year, and I just divide it up by the number of days that they're going to be based on the public school calendar. So we go by our district's school calendar, so we know what holidays the school district is going to be closed and all those different things. And so then I just map out. And so my mom helped me with this the first year, and then this year I've done it myself, being able to use the calendar and the number of days and splitting those things up so that the kids have a breakdown for all of that.
Gotcha. Now, so what does like a day, or like what does your week look like then? Starting with Monday morning. Um,
So the kids are with Teresa on Monday and Tuesday, so I get them back on Wednesday morning.
mhm,
She drops Oren off at public school before she drops off the girls, and then she drops off the girls. And once they start school, they usually start with their history and literature reading, and then they might do science, and I'll be sitting in the living room or in the dining room while they're doing all their different reading stuff. If they have a question, which this year I get the occasional question from Charlotte. Abby's the one who used to have the most questions. This year she's had very few. Typical
mhm.
oldest, she's the guinea pig, and then once she figures it out, everybody else has it pretty easy after that. But yeah, I can sit there and I can help them with if they're confused on a word, or if in science they're not understanding a particular piece of something, we can do some additional investigation. And then when they're done with those subjects, when it comes to math, I tend to, Charlotte's been pretty good about not needing help on those things. Last year, I had to sit down with Abby almost every day with a lot of that stuff. This year with Saxon, she's able to read the material before the actual written work, and she
Mhm.
hasn't needed very much help at all. And so then a lot of the actual quote unquote work that I'm doing with them is just in grading. And then as I'm grading it, where they made mistakes, where they have issues, I don't do the whole thing of just like, oh, you got that one wrong. Hope you get it better next time. No, we sit and we talk about whatever thing the mistake was, because at the end of the day, their sheet shows a perfect grade because we cover all of the incorrect answers, because otherwise they didn't learn anything. And what's the
Yeah.
point?
Right.
But yeah, when they're done with that, it usually only takes them a few hours, honestly. And so then they get to play for the rest of the day, and that's nice for them.
Nice. Well, and I think you bring up an interesting point. And I saw this in public school. We're like, okay, well, you got to see and move on, but that's not real learning. Like the real learning is like making sure that they understand the material, that they understand why they got something wrong, and then be have the opportunity to be able to correct the thing and go, oh, I get it.
Mm.
I get how that works. So I love and appreciate that. Um, so then how many hours would you say? Because you said a few hours. Like, is it 2 hours? Is it 4 hours usually that it takes them to get their work done?
It obviously depends on how lucid they're feeling during the day and the amount of work they have to do on a given day. But minimum, I've had days where they've both finished all their work in 2 hours because it just wasn't a heavy amount of work
Mhm.
for that day and they got it done really quickly. And I've had days where it took them pretty much the whole day. There were days where it took like 8 hours because they kept taking breaks or they kept getting distracted and things like that. But all that's normal. It's just, a day in the life.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's us as humans. Like sometimes our brains need a break, and the beauty of homeschooling is they can take a
Mm.
break if they need it. Um, Do they take their curriculum back and forth with them, or do you have two sets of curriculum?
No, we got big enough backpacks that they can cart all their crap around back and forth, which I had advocated against, but and the kids aren't enjoying it super. They're not in love with the idea because it's a lot of heavy books and things.
Mhm.
But yeah, it saves us having to spend an extra $500 on all the course material twice. Yeah, so it is what it is.
Now, and now that y'all have been doing it for this, you're going on. Is this going on the second year or the third year for y'all?
This is the second year.
How has it been for your ex-wife now? Now that she's had a little bit of time, had a year. Well, last year you did it predominantly, but this year, how has it been going for her in your from your perspective?
She So before we ever did this, she had gotten a taste of her own being an educator. She had tried to help one of her nieces with some homeschool stuff that she had been doing, and she
Hmm.
hated it. And that was a big part of why she had the opinion of, if you want to do homeschooling, you're going to be responsible for all of it because I am not cut out for teaching. And she has had somewhat a similar experience this time. It's not as
Hmm.
dramatic as it was last time. She's doing just fine. The kids do perfectly okay
Hmm.
when they're with her and they're getting all the work done. But I don't think she enjoys it very much.
Gotcha.
And so we'll see if we do the same thing again next year. But again, benefit of homeschooling is it's flexible. We can adjust the plan every year if we have to.
Yeah, it's true. And if it doesn't work, you change it. And if it does work, you keep going,
Mhm.
which is really great because it is not like that in public school. If it doesn't work, well, there's all this red tape.
Yeah.
Okay, so then for you, how has it been? And now, does she work as well, or is she does she stay at home?
She does. She works as well. She is has a mixed schedule, so she's able to work from home. The Monday and Tuesday she has the kids, and then she's
Mhm.
in office the rest of the week.
Gotcha, gotcha. So, what have been some of the challenges for you as a working dad trying to homeschool them at the same time?
I mean, the obvious things that you'd expect. There are days where I have a bazillion meetings and I'm trying to also make time to help them with things. And so it means that I have to tell them, you're going to have to wait a minute while I do these other meetings and things. And then after the meeting, I can help them with stuff, or it ends up meaning that they get to play for the first, during my work day. And then we finish all the stuff I need to help them with at the end of the day after I'm done with work. It's just part of life. It's organic. You have to figure it out every day. And most
Mhm.
days are fine. Most days are pretty flexible. Again, I have a huge advantage of being able to work from home, but time wise, it's just a juggling act.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm a bit afraid. I'm under the gun on a bunch of things, and I don't have my own, mental emotional capacity to give to all of that stuff every single day, but we figure it out and make it work. And when there are things that I clearly didn't address very well with them, I can address better. And the next week, we can go back a little bit and repeat something if I didn't do a good job of explaining it the previous time. And then we can come back to whatever they're doing that next week. But yeah, it's all very organic.
So, which brings up the next question for you is during the days that are hard for you, where you're just trying to adult and
Mm-hmm.
live life. What are some of the things that you do to keep your head above water and to make sure that you're okay?
Mm-hmm. That's a more complicated question. I don't feel like I have a great answer for.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of things is just I breathe through it. I understand. I'm really pissed off right now, and if I air this out on my kids, that's going to be a bad time. So I'm going to communicate and verbalize to my kids. You focus on this other thing, or go take a break and play for a minute if I don't have some other good work for you to do. And then I have to go focus on this thing, and then again we'll readdress. And there are times where, hey, we just didn't get to everything today, so we're just going to have to push this subject forward today. So we end up doing one thing on a Saturday when normally all their work would be done on Friday would be their last day. There are times where we have to push bits and pieces of things to Saturdays, and it's just that definitely gives you some nice sanity keeping piece of knowing I don't have to get all of this done right now. I don't have to get all
Mhm.
this done today. There is time, there is flexibility here. And that was a big frustration when the girls were in public schooling for those first couple of years, and even it's not so much with Oren because he's only in kindergarten so far, but with the public school environment, there was no flexibility. It's this
Mhm.
thing is happening this day at this time, and you have to have everything done before that. Or if it's an event, you have to be there.
Mhm.
So if there's an overlap in, I'm trying to work, I got meetings, I have these deadlines, and I got to go to the school thing, there was just no give in any part of that. With homeschool, if it's, hey, we'd planned to go do a homeschool outing of some sort, we wanted to go to a pumpkin patch and learn something, but now life is crazy, we can push it a day. We have all of those bits of flexibility to keep ourselves sane, and they don't have to lose their minds. I don't have to lose mine, and everyone can be okay with each other.
I love it. Now, how did the girls feel about the homeschooling?
The in general, they're young, so they don't like any school at all. They would love to just never have to do anything. But as far as schooling goes, they do like it. They like that it's not a whole day commitment. They like
Mhm.
that it's flexible and catered to them. They like being able to be home. They like being able to be with family. They like being able to be together doing stuff. The one stick point that is an ongoing process of trying to solve is I personally don't think that public school is a good socializing environment. I think trying to
Mhm.
combine education and socialization complicates both. You're half-assing two things.
Yeah.
Um, so we're still trying to figure out they miss their friends, and we try to give them places they can go and meet other kids and have fun and form their branch out their social network. It's not been completely successful thus far, but we're
Mhm.
2 years in still, and we're still trying to figure it out. And right now, it seems to be an issue outside of schooling and outside of things in general. Just kind of hard to get kids to make friends these days.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say because I mean that's the when we decided to pull our kids, people were like, "Aren't you worried about socialization?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? With all the bullying that happens in school and all the garbage, I there's been at least 5 kids that I'm aware of outside of my family whose like in middle school and in high school would go eat lunch either in the bathroom or in a classroom because they felt like they had no friends and they're surrounded by all these kids, but that doesn't mean that they're going to make friends with those kids, and there's not a lot of opportunity within classes to actually become really good friends. You get short recesses, virtually no lunch, and the teacher is standing and delivering, you know.
Mm.
And yet, and then on top of it, you've got all of the social garbage that goes on, such as the bullying and politics now in the school and all the different things. And I'm like, really, you're worried about my child being socialized? Like, just take a look at the public school. What's actually happening?
Well, look
Uh,
at the society of people that came from public school. They don't seem to be doing particularly well, so maybe
yeah,
that's not the best solution.
right. We're not looking at all these stellar people. Like in society, we're not doing great.
Yeah.
Like our society's not doing great. So it's true. And the majority of society is public schooled. So I think you're right on with that. So what do you do enrichment programs or co-ops or anything? Have y'all gotten involved in any enrichments or co-ops?
We have done to a limited degree. That is
Mm-hmm.
one of the other complications of the co-parenting situation is that's another thing that Trace had a negative experience with other homeschool kids. She has that classic perspective of homeschool kids being, completely unsociable and
Mm-hmm.
entirely socially incompetent. And so she doesn't want our kids to be that way, and
Mm-hmm.
also then is resistant to socializing our kids with other homeschool kids where then they all just make each other more weird from her perspective. So yeah, we have our things where we try to find something that we can both agree to that we're both happy with, She's more focused on activities and athletics, which that's fine, but it
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily, it has the same sort of problem as public schooling where all of your time is dedicated to something else, so then you can't properly focus on getting to know any of the people around you. So I try to find a balance of how do we give them something to do, but then also give them time to meet other people and talk to other people. So it's been a mix of things.
Yeah. So they do like ballet and sports and things like that.
Rock climbing, soccer, baseball. Charlotte was interested in dance for a minute and then she changed her mind. So she's done art stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah, different activities like that.
I love it. It's true. Well, and even in those activities, like it's still adult led and the kids are doing what they're supposed to. And then when it's time to go, parents pick them up and they don't socialize a ton.
Yeah.
All my kids have been in all the things, but I have to chuckle at your wife's perspective because I look at my kids who were in public school, and my two oldest graduated from public school. My next two I pulled right before high school, and one is a senior this year, one is a junior, and then I've got two littles, one that's in middle school, one that's in elementary, and their best friends have been. My son has maintained his public school friendships,
Mm-hmm.
and then made more friendships with public and homeschoolers, but he's also this ridiculous social butterfly
Mm-hmm.
and makes friends with everybody. And then my daughter's, she's maintained some of those public school friendships, kind of, with one or two kids. But her best friends have been through the enrichment program that we signed her up for a couple of years ago, and that's who comes and hangs out at the house, and they're the farthest thing from weird, especially when I look at some of the kids that she was in public school with, where I'm like, and now I'm seeing them as teenagers. Holy cow, I feel so bad for their parents. Sweet
Yeah.
girls, and what happened? So I think it's funny because I was the opposite. Like my kids didn't go to weren't homeschooled and I wasn't homeschooled. Although I did know a couple homeschool families that I thought were weird, but now it's so commonplace that you're going to get a mix of everything. And usually if they're weird in homeschool, most likely if they were in public school, they'd be weird there too. So there's that.
Yeah, and a lot of where that stereotype has come from in my experience is the fact that homeschool didn't used to be super prevalent in well-populated areas. So
Mhm.
the homeschool people you'd meet were people who grew up not only not in public school, but then not really in a highly populated area. They were
Yeah.
big families that were in very, very small areas where they might have lived on a farm completely away from the town they were closest to that was really far away from the bigger city. Nowadays, having homeschool families be pretty prevalent even in cities, even in highly populated areas, and they do have friends, they have social networks, and we have now social media connecting everybody, which
Mhm.
wasn't as prevalent when I was a kid. So, yeah, the entire homeschool kid stereotype has changed and the dynamic has changed a lot.
Yeah. Well, since COVID, it's become, because we're COVID converts, it's become so much more commonplace. So
Mm.
what would be the last bit of advice that you'd give to parents, considering, especially those that are single parents, um, that are thinking about homeschooling? What advice would you give them?
Again, really just look into the community because if you're auditing, is this something that I should or can do? It's important to think about what are your goals and why are you considering it, and then looking into other people that have had similar experiences, similar interests, and what their experiences have been to see if it's going to be a good fit for your situation, for your particular, what you're trying to do. Getting into connections with those kinds of people is really, really helpful.
Hmm.
And then, as far as if you've already decided, yeah, I want to try this, how do I do this? Lean
Hmm.
into the community to find the best resources, the best ways of getting things done, because there are 1,000 different ways you can do each different piece of it. And then also, being part of the community yourself makes it to where you will have people on your side. You will have people because once you leave the public school environment, you'll have a community of people around you that can help with different things. And then, yeah, just be flexible with yourself. Don't take the assumption that it has to be so strict and stringent. Be willing to consider options for different things that maybe you had thought about before, where it's like, I have to do everything by what's in this book. There are a million ways you can supplement materials to the book, that you can supplement information to what's in the curriculums. It is a very, very dynamic, organic, and flexible community way of doing things, methodology. So just keep an open mind and really look into the community.
I love it. Michael, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing about your life and the struggles as well as the things that are working. I appreciate it. I know my audience will appreciate it as well. For those of y'all listening, you're doing better than you think you are. You really are. And you've got this, mamas and papas and grandmas and grandpas. We'll talk next week. If you enjoyed this today, please like and subscribe. You could also join our private Facebook group at School to Homeschool or sign up for our newsletter at www.schooltohomeschool. Have a great day.